How's it going, folks? It's Juno here. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about, we're going to keep it a little bit on the neurology, but mostly I want to talk about evolution. And this is going to be in the physiology of evolution. So in front of you now, you can see a picture that many people are aware of, many people are familiar with. It's this evolutionary lineage from monkey to man, and inset with this image, very usefully, they've given us representation of the skull of each individual. And you can see from one to the next, as they proceed, some subtle changes take place. They lose the thickness in the mandible. There's a bit of a change around the ocular sockets. But the most pronounced change, obviously, is the cranium and the size of the cavity for the brain. Now, I understand there is a number of theories surrounding posture and evolution. As you can see in each picture here, progressively the posture of the individual becomes more upright as evolution continues, and then you're left with this fully upright representative on the far right with the largest capacity brain. And just so I state that I do understand the orthodox view on this, I'll begin with this study here from 2010. Just very quickly, during the last century, approximately 30 hypotheses have been constructed to explain the evolution of the human upright posture and locomotion. The most important and recent ones discussed here. Meanwhile, it has been established that all main hypotheses published until the last decade of the past century are outdated, at least with respect to some of their main ideas. Firstly, they were focused on only one cause for the evolution of bipedality, whereas the evolutionary process was much more complex. Secondly, they were all placed into a savanna scenario. During the 1990s, the fossil record allowed for the reconstruction of emerging bipedalism, more precisely in a forested habitat. And moreover, the fossil remains revealed increasing evidence that this part of human evolution took place in a more humid environment than previously assumed. The amphibian generalist theory, presented first in the year 2000, suggests that bipedalism began in a wooded habitat, and forests were not far from a shore, where our early ancestor, along with its arboreal habits, walked and waded in shallow water, finding rich food with little investment. In contrast to all other theories, wading behavior not only triggered the upright posture, but also forces the individual to maintain this posture and to walk bipedally. So far, this is the only scenario suitable to overcome the considerable anatomical and functional threshold from quadrupedalism to bipedalism. This is consistent with the paleoanthropological findings and with functional anatomy, as well as with energetic calculations and not least with evolutionary psychology. The new synthesis presented here is able to harmonize many of the hitherto competing theories. So there you go. It gives you the outline of the most popular understood theory at the moment. Now, I'm going to suggest something not uncomplimentary, but perhaps a deviation and a bit unorthodox. I will speculate that as posture changed, it was the changing of the posture that initiated an increase in the size of the brain. So what I'm speculating here actually is because of problems with neuroinflammation, it would be difficult to maintain a CNS size of above a certain threshold while still compensating for that level of neural inflammation that is likely to be incurred when the posture tilts forward and aligns the spine and the brain in such a way that strikes to the top of the head are more likely, even in accidental situations. So what I'm speculating, therefore, is that it is intricately linked that for a larger brain mass and for a more efficient brain matter, an upright posture is necessitated first, and the effect, therefore, is afterwards the brain is allowed to adapt. And I'm going to give some examples here. So just to begin with, I firstly want to give an example of a mimetic expression of this function, and I'm going to show potentially how it actually existed not that long ago, that it was being encouraged to stratify the caste system in society. And the way I will express this is by looking at historical representatives of slaves and masters. So in front of you now is a historical image representing Greek slaves at work. And each one of these examples here, you can see a stooped posture, an upright posture. And if we scroll across, this is a king of Babylon with a vassal. And as you can see, this is perfectly straight posture as exhibited here. And to accentuate this, not an unsignificant distance in time, here we have an example of a lord with peasants in the field, and a number of dignitaries before a king. And here we have a religious expression showing correct positioning while praying. Again, with the stooped posture. So it seems quite clear to me that at least in as a representation of submission, a stooped posture is assumed. However, my suspicion is because posture and brain function are intricately linked, having a dominant force always maintain an upright posture and impose a suboptimal posture on those of a subservient position, that is actually reinforcing that ongoing stratification in society. And I would also represent this as saying, if you go back to the example of the slaves and the king, or the peasants and the lord, it seems counterintuitive that should the peasants be, or slaves be, in labouring all day, they would be, and the lord just being either sedentary or in some administrative or intellectual work, it would seem unlikely that you would be able to maintain that dichotomy indefinitely. And the reason I suggest that is because, as I said, if the workers are exercising frequently and are focusing on their physical attributes, and the overseer is not doing that, then would it not be the case that at a certain critical mass you would have these very strong individuals comprising the subservient class and quite a weak dominant class trying to preside over them? And that seems somewhat illogical to me. If there's no neurological deficiency, if there's no stratification of intelligence, how could you maintain that position? And my argument here is maybe they were able to maintain that stratification by enforcing this behavior that actually reduced intellectual potential in the subservient class, by forcing them to stoop and forcing them to take jobs and perform jobs that actually maintained this negative posture. That may have actually limited intentionally their intellectual ability to prevent them from being able to organize in such a way that they could effectively revolt or undermine the authority of the monarch. And I'm going to see if I can express that now with some more information from the neurological department. So, as we see here, neurological disorders of gait, balance, and posture are a sign-based approach. Just going to read briefly because I want to prime this for some other details I'm going to come into in a minute. But neurological disorders of gait, balance, and posture are both debilitating and common. Adequate recognition of these so-called disorders of axial mobility is important, as they can offer useful clues to the underlying pathology in patients with an uncertain clinical diagnosis, such as those early in the course of neurological disorders. Okay, so there is a link here being implied between the early indication of neurological disorders and potentially bad posture and gait. Medical teaching programs typically take classic clinical presentations as the starting point and present students with a representative constellation of features that jointly characterize a particular axial motor syndrome. However, patients rarely present in this way to a physician in clinical practice. Particularly in the early stages of the disease, patients might display just one, or at best a few, abnormal signs of gait, balance, and posture. Importantly, these individual signs are never pathognomonic for any specific disorder, but rather come with an associated differential diagnosis. In this perspective, we offer a new diagnostic approach in which the presenting signs are taken as a starting point for a focused differential diagnosis and a tailored search into the underlying neurological syndrome. So, this may not be entirely supportive of what I'm saying. However, I think it is very important for the context of what I'm trying to get at here, which is there is clearly a link, and if I'm speculating, I understand that potentially the link is being given in the reverse order. They're saying that posture and disorders of gait and balance are actually symptomatic of other issues, whereas I'm saying actually maybe the other issues are symptomatic of ongoing, systemic, habitual, poor gait, poor balance and poor posture. However, I'm going to lead into this in a moment, so I'm not saying that as I'm postulating it, but I'm not committing entirely to it because I'm going to offer some contrary evidence to that as well. But continuing on, here we have a classical presentation of posture as a function of age. So this is what you would normally expect to see. As someone grows older, naturally you imagine you will begin to see their posture decline, and this is atypical also of neurodegenerative decline in the aging population. So here is, a common presentation. So in Parkinson's, we are asked to look specifically for examples of stooped posture and other signs, which I will go into a little bit, but masked face, so very little acuity in facial expression, reduced arm swing, hand tremors, all signatory of potentially other conditions, but understanding the mechanism itself. Back rigidity, so muscle rigidity probably related to reduced arm swing as well. Tremors in the legs, slightly flexed hips and ankles, shuffling, short step gait. Now if we continue on, I've selected this section here that I want to read out in reference to what we just looked at. So, heel to toe characteristic. Whereas in normal gait, the heel strikes the ground before the toes, also called heel-toe walking, the Parkinsonian gait, motion is characterized by a flat foot strike where the entire foot is placed on the ground at the same time, or less often, and in the more advanced stages of the disease, by heel-toe walking, where the toes touch the ground before the heel. In addition, Parkinson's disease patients have reduced foot lifting during the swing phase of the gait, which produce smaller clearance between toes and the ground. I will read the second bit in a moment. However, I want to stress here that if my hypothesis, which states that posture adjustment came before brain development, brain evolution, then what we could also suggest is if that posture allowed for a reduction in neuroinflammatory events, that would also be characterized by concussive force, impact force on the heel driving up into the base of the spine. In which case, could we look at Parkinson's gait to be a reaction to this inflammatory process, where the body is actually trying to reduce the force of impact on the heel, knowing that the heel will then directly infer that force into the spine, and is trying to progress it into the toe instead, which will produce a more cushioned impact and reduce the potential for further neuroinflammation in the spine and the CNS. Alright, I'll continue. Patients with Parkinson's disease have reduced impact at heel strides, and this mechanism is found to be related to the disease severity, with impact decreasing as the disease progresses. Also, Parkinson's patients show a trend towards high relative loads in the forefoot regions, combined with a load shift towards medial foot areas. This load shift is believed to help in compensating for postural imbalance. The intra-individual variability in foot strike pattern is found to be surprisingly lower in Parkinson's disease patients compared with normal people. Now, I suspect that last section there is significant, and I think this, again, implicates my theory that it is a counteractive measure to reduce neuroinflammation by reducing impact on the spine, on the CNS, by reducing the amount of impact suffered directly onto the heel. All right, let me continue. So Parkinson's, ALS, frontotemporal dementia, they all have a limited amount of relation to the prefrontal cortex, and because of that, I am just going to bring it up here so that we can have an example, something to give us a frame of reference moving forward. So here in the prefrontal cortex, what we have is the light blue area is designated as prefrontal, the yellow area is premotor, and then the pink is motor. And this would obviously affect motor, would affect balance, gait, and your posture. So it is understood why these areas can be related. The green area there is the limbic. So adding that to the context, if we move forward, signs and symptoms of frontotemporal dementia: changes in personality. A person may become quite withdrawn, even if they're usually outgoing. Emotional changes such as being cold and distant. Difficulty understanding what is considered appropriate behaviour or seeming to have no filter. Please remember that for the time being. I'm going to bring that up in a moment. Change in language, such as words coming out in the wrong order. Becoming easily distracted or confused. Easily overwhelmed. Difficulty with movement. Repetitive behaviour such as obsessive cleaning. Not looking after themselves. Binge eating. Alright, remember specifically a couple there, one of which is difficulty with movement, obviously, the emotional changes, change personality, but also the no filter part. I think this is very, very interesting. So if we move forward now, I know this seems unrelated, but I'm going to establish this, so bear with me. This is from an article describing autism in children. Now, in a previous video, I referenced what I believe to be signatory signs in autism development in individuals and potential precursors for neurodegenerative conditions. And you can look back on that video, should be the last one in the series that I've done. I believe that was part 4 in the neurodegen playlist, and you can see what my research finds in that area. However, moving forward onto this in a related manner, school-age children and teenagers may display some of the following. This is for autism. A preference for being alone, a lack of relationships, a lack of friendships, aggression, agitation, anxiety. All right, remember what we just talked about on FTD. Difficulty making conversations, heightened sense of smell or lowered, obsession with topics, problems interpreting non-verbal and social cues. Again, think about FTD as well. Rigidity, unusual posture or movements, unusual speech patterns and tone. All right. So just going to go back so that we can do a compare and contrast here. Repetitive behavior, easy distracted and confused, change in language, difficulty understanding appropriate behavior, having no filter, emotionally distant, changes in personality, becoming withdrawn. All right, I feel like I've established that now, that there may be at least some overlap here. But let me move on to this article about motor difficulties in autism specifically. All right, so let's have a look. 87%, according to latest estimate, have some sort of motor difficulty. This is from autistic people, ranging in atypical gait to problems handwriting. By the way, small handwriting can also be a signifier of other neurological conditions. These issues are distinct from the repetitive behaviours considered a hallmark. Yet, despite the prevalence, motor problems are not considered a core trait because they also occur with other conditions like Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. Interesting. All right, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We'll describe here what we know about the causes, characteristics, and consequences. So what types of issues do they have? Gross motor problems such as being clumsy, uncoordinated gait, difficulty with fine motor control, manipulating objects, and handwriting. Some may have trouble coordinating movements in the left and right side of the body, different limbs, making it difficult to do actions like pumping the legs on a swing, jumping, skipping, hopping. Others may have low muscle tone, okay? Problems with posture and balance. Others seem to have trouble with actions requiring hand-eye coordination, catching a ball, imitating the movements of others, planning a series of movements or gestures known as praxis. Mild to severe impact on the body. Struggling to grasp objects, sitting up, not clapping and pointing. Alright, I think I've established at least somewhat here some of the overlap I believe to be in case of that. And my explanation as well, going back to the beginning of the presentation, is that we have evolved into this condition of reducing neuroinflammation. And the homeostasis of the CNS is a very specific one. And if we are to address these problems, looking at autism, are we finding fundamentally something that is a neurological problem that is related to neurodegenerative conditions? If so, would there be some crossover on a genetic perspective, on the genetic side of things? Are there crossover between the conditions? If not, then we can look to the mechanisms. Are the mechanisms shared in the dysfunction between neurodegenerative conditions, autism, maybe ADHD as well? And is that somewhat an evolution of prior social stratification? So would you be liable to see these in the descendants of members of the aristocracy, or is it more likely you'd find them in the revered peasant classes and their progeny? Okay, I think I've said a lot for now. I actually didn't want to make a long vid about this because it's a very open-ended topic, and I wanted definitely to be more on the evolution of neurology, the brain evolution, and my theory about it being the posture that changed first, and the change in the posture reducing neuroinflammation, allowing more complexity of the brain and a greater mass in the brain, and how that very design of reducing neuroinflammation is what makes us so vulnerable to neuroinflammation now in our current state, that it presents in neurodegeneration. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you have any questions or anything, I'd love to hear from everybody. And I'd just like to thank everyone who makes the information available online, because we're in such multitudes now of individuals that people can make genuine contributions. And there is a ratio to be defined yet where, signal to noise. I know no one or very few people are willingly adding to the noise, but maybe we can collectively add to the signal, if possible, by at least putting out that creative element of pattern recognition that so many people are gifted with, and seeing if we can all benefit from that, even in a cross or an interdisciplinary fashion. So yeah, thank you very much, and look after yourselves.